"Hey, old man, go back to the nursing home before you snap the other leg." The words sliced through the crowd like a knife. The bullies' laughter echoed across the square, amplified by the curious onlookers gathered around the makeshift ring in the center of town. The old man moved slowly, hunched over, leaning on a dark wooden cane that looked older than he was. The crowd watched like it was a circus act. No one stood up for him. No one dared laugh back. That's how the three thugs kept control, through intimidation, spectacle, and fear. They called themselves the Concrete Champions, Chad, Logan, and Rick. Once amateur fighters in the States, they'd been banned from official competitions for excessive violence. Now, they found small towns overseas to be the perfect stage to feed their egos. Black belts in different styles, inked with skulls and Latin phrases, and flashing cocky grins whenever a weaker target crossed their path. But this wasn't just for fun. They turned the village into an underground fight hub, streaming brawls to millions of online gamblers. In the crowd stood a quiet young man, watching with sharp, restrained eyes. His name was Akio. Narrow gaze, withdrawn posture, arms crossed, almost invisible among the rest. Few knew much about him. Rumor was he was the grandson of a master who'd vanished decades ago. Silent, friendless, slipping away at night like a shadow. What no one knew was that Akio had grown up inside temple walls, repeating the same motions day after day, in silence. The old stone halls carried forgotten history, and every moment of stillness was training. The old man stepping up to the ring wasn't just anybody. It was Han, Akio's grandfather. No one recognized him at first, dressed in plain wanderer's clothes, with a long grey beard hiding what had once been a face feared by fighters on 3 continents. Han wasn't one for words. He'd avoided conflict for years, but that night was different. That night he saw something he couldn't ignore, the 3 bullies kicking down a sacred altar at the temple, laughing, recording, stomping on the very history he'd sworn to protect. Just days before, Chad and Logan had stormed into the temple courtyard, filming a prank video, kicking statues, mocking monks with goofy poses, Rick blasting music and dancing in the background. The video went viral. Caption read, "Kung Fu is just theater." Thousands laughed, but to Han it was a mortal insult. He stayed silent for 3 days. On the 4th, he picked up his cane, put on a simple hat, and came down the mountain for the first time in years. Akio tried to stop him. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone," he said. But Han didn't reply. He simply walked, the way he always did, with purpose. In the square, when the thugs mocked his age, Han didn't shrink, didn't hesitate. He stepped into the ring, ignoring the laughter all around. To the crowd, it was madness, a joke, but those who knew the old temple bloodline understood. When an elder climbs into the ring, it's because he's already won inside. Rick attacked first, grinning as he pretended to trip. "Let's help Grandpa take a nap," he sneered, but Han simply shifted his weight. A subtle tap of the cane on Rick's leg. Rick lost balance and hit the ground like a sack of bricks. Silence swallowed the crowd. Chad and Logan exchanged looks. No one was laughing anymore. Logan lunged with a side kick. Han bent low, hooked the kid's knee, and spun him mid-air before he slammed down flat on his back. Chad hesitated, then roared and charged head-on. Han sidestepped, calm as water, and landed a single palm strike to his chest. Chad collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. In the stunned silence, Akio felt his whole body shiver. He had never seen his grandfather fight. He always thought the old man had abandoned the art. But right there, Han looked decades younger. His moves were fluid, like wind, yet every gesture shattered his opponent's balance. The crowd didn't know if they were watching humiliation or living martial arts history. Akio understood in that moment. This fight wasn't about him. It wasn't about revenge. It was about memory, about respect. When it was over, Han looked at the 3 men on the ground. He stepped out of the ring, walked up to Akio, and stopped. "You already know. What you lack is courage." He said nothing else, then vanished into the crowd. The next day, the bullies were gone, the ring dismantled, and on the temple wall, fresh graffiti appeared. "Respect what you don't understand." Since the day of the showdown in the square, something had shifted in the village air. Faces that once ignored the old temple now looked at it with curiosity and even respect. Some left quiet offerings on the stone steps, others simply stopped to watch, as if expecting the old Master Han to step out from the shadows. But he never showed himself again. He went back to secluding inside those stone walls, the way he always had, leaving behind only the echo of his movements and the weight of a tradition few understood. Akio, on the other hand, was changing. Every morning started before sunrise with endless drills and repetitions. Fists cutting the air, feet rooted to the ground, breath measured to the second. His body ached, but he didn't stop. What used to feel like a silent routine, aimless and mechanical, now carried a new weight. He had seen what his grandfather was capable of. He'd seen someone who could command a crowd without speaking a word. And now he wanted that, not for glory, not for revenge, but to understand, to carry it forward. The temple was ancient, built with stone brought from deep within China. Every hallway whispered the stories of masters who had trained, taught, and died there. In the main hall, faded murals still showed scenes of combat and meditation. There was dust, yes, and neglect, but not ruin. Han kept everything in his own quiet way. And though he never praised Akio, every day after training he would pass by and give the faintest nod. That was enough for his grandson to know. He was on the right path. In the village, the rumors spread. Some said the old man had beaten the 3 Americans with magic. Others swore he'd once belonged to some secret assassin brotherhood. The truth was far less mystical, but even more powerful. Han was one of the last living masters of Xin Yu Quan, the Silent Heart Fist, a lineage that had survived wars, invasions, and regimes. And now it lived only in that temple, in that man, and maybe in Akio. But not everyone welcomed the newfound reverence for the temple. Outsiders began showing up in the village. Men in suits, flashing expensive phones, with cold, calculating eyes. They claimed they wanted to revitalize the area, open modern fight gyms, bring in televised events, expand with big investments. They talked about progress, opportunity, growth, but Akio could feel something wrong. Their eyes never lingered on people, only on spaces, measuring land, calculating angles, searching for something. That was when Akio stumbled upon an old book hidden beneath the temple's main altar. Aged but intact, the cover carried the family crest in gold, 2 intertwined dragons. When he opened it, the first name written inside was his father's. Up until then, Akio had known almost nothing about him. Han never spoke. The story was that he'd died young, away on a trip, in some accident. But here was proof that his absence carried a deeper truth. The book contained training notes, techniques, scribbled observations. One line read, "The enemy won't come only with force. He'll come with promises." As Akio read, he heard footsteps. Han stood in the distance, watching. Their eyes met for a few long seconds. The old man said nothing. He simply turned and walked away, as if the discovery had always been part of the plan. That burned in Akio's mind. Why had his father been erased from the temple's history? Why had no one ever spoken of him? And why now, of all times, were businessmen suddenly appearing with their partnerships? Weeks passed, and Akio pushed harder in training. He wasn't just learning strikes now, he was learning principles, balance, patience, observation. He learned to move unnoticed, to hear the sound of flowing water, to feel the weight of silence itself. Han didn't offer praise, but he watched more closely. Sometimes he corrected a stance with the slightest gesture. Other times, he'd leave a meal in the kitchen earlier than usual, a silent recognition of effort. One afternoon, returning from training in the forest, Akio spotted strange marks around the temple grounds. Fresh footprints, many of them, heavy boots, combat soles, and a torn scrap of paper pinned to the gate with an arrow. It was a photograph. Han, decades younger, and beside him, another man. Broad-shouldered, blonde, scar running across his face. On the back, scrawled in bold red letters, were just 2 words. "We're back." Night fell without warning. The wind blew drier than usual, and the temple, silent as ever, seemed to be holding its breath. Akio was in the training hall, running through sequences with a short wooden spear, an exercise his grandfather rarely allowed. That weapon, passed down through generations of the Shinyu Quan style, demanded absolute control of hips and wrists. He was focused, dripping with sweat, his shirt sticking to his skin, when he heard a crack. Small, almost nothing, but real, like wood under pressure. He dropped the spear, walked out slowly, barefoot, down the stone corridor toward the main gate. It had been forced open. Akio didn't shout, didn't panic. His heartbeat ticked like a clock, steady but fast. He moved exactly as he'd been trained, grabbed a shorter staff, slipped through the shadows of the outer hall, and scanned the courtyard. 3 figures moved with military precision. Dark clothes, masks, calculated steps. One carried what looked like a stun baton, another a curved blade. They weren't there by accident. They were hunting something or someone. One of them spotted Akio and barked a command in English. Then they charged. Akio didn't run, didn't hesitate. He planted his stance. The first came hard, swinging for his chest with the baton. Akio twisted aside, struck the man's arm with a lateral snap. The weapon clattered to the ground. The second lunged with the knife. Akio trapped the wrist with his staff, pivoted, and slammed him into the stone wall. The third tried to grab him from behind, but Akio stomped his foot, drove an upward strike into his jaw, and dropped him cold. 3 down. But Akio knew it wasn't over. A 4th man stepped out. Different, no mask. Scarred face, hollow eyes, a smile that didn't belong in the tension of that night. Jake Coleman, ex-pro fighter and trainer of the American thugs Han had humiliated weeks before. Jake walked with chaos in his stride. He didn't need to say much. He was there for revenge, and maybe more. "So you're the grandson," Jake sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did he actually train you?" Akio stayed silent, reset his stance, staff firm, chin tucked. Jake lunged with a straight punch. Akio dodged, countered with the staff, but Jake caught it mid-swing and hurled him against the gate. Pain exploded in Akio's shoulder as the staff rolled away. He staggered up, wincing, but his anger stayed controlled. "Your grandfather humiliated me in front of the world. Now you'll pay for it," Jake growled. This time, Akio attacked first, tried to clinch. Jake hammered him with knees. The impacts echoed through the empty courtyard. It wasn't even. Akio had technique, but Jake had size, raw power, and dirty tricks. One slip and Jake's fist drove into Akio's stomach, folding him to his knees. Jake raised his arm ready to finish it with one brutal blow when a voice cut through the night. "Enough." Han, standing at the top of the temple steps. Silent, yet his presence filled the space. He walked down slowly, step by step. By the time he reached the courtyard, Jake had already stepped back without realizing it. The memory of that last defeat still burned, but he didn't run. "Want another lesson, old man?" Jake spat. Han didn't answer. He helped Akio to his feet and stepped in front of him. "This fight isn't mine," he said softly, "but honor is." The clash lasted less than 30 seconds. Jake repeated the same attacks, but Han, even older, even wounded, slipped around them with barely visible shifts. He turned Jake's weight against him, locked his arm, pressed a nerve at his neck and dropped him flat with a single touch. Jake didn't move again. The other three crawled into the night. Han watched them vanish into the trees, but when he turned to Akio, his face had changed. Less rigid, more troubled. "They're not the worst," Han said quietly. "They're just the beginning." Akio wiped blood from his lip, looked up at the dark sky. He knew this wasn't just an attack, it was a warning. The next day, Victor appeared. Sunglasses, plain suit, the same shadowed look as the old temple photos. He didn't smile, didn't introduce himself. He simply said, "His name is Kieran, and if you think this was bad, you're dead wrong." From that day on, the temple became a place of constant watch. Han spoke little, but his eyes missed nothing. His movements slowed, and Akio could see the weight of time pressing down, not only on his body, but on his mind. For the first time, the old man seemed unsettled. The ghosts he'd buried for decades were clawing back to the surface. The name Victor had spoken, Kieran, carried more than threat. It carried betrayal, blood, loss. Victor became a fixture, no longer the cocky student who once trained under Han, now a broken man. Guilt hunched his shoulders. He moved like someone approaching an altar he'd sworn never to enter again. He spent afternoons sitting in the courtyard, saying little. Until one morning, as Akio walked by, arms marked with bruises from training, Victor called to him. He wanted to show something. He led Akio to an old warehouse behind the village. Inside, among dust-covered crates, was a heavy wooden chest. Inside, newspaper clippings, old photos, and a letter stamped with the temple seal. The story Victor told was darker than Akio imagined. Kieran, in his youth, was a prodigy. He trained under Han for 3 years and learned fast, but he was ambitious, reckless. To him, Kung Fu was a weapon for power, not a way of life. He tried to commercialize it, selling techniques to elite gyms. Han cast him out. But before leaving, Kieran struck back with another weapon. Humiliation. He spread lies, challenged the temple in underground networks. And worse, he was the one responsible for the death of Akio's father during a covert mission in Southeast Asia, where the temple's martial arts were being used for military training. The ground seemed to fall out beneath Akio. He had grown up believing his father died in an accident. Now, with the evidence in his hands, he knew the truth had been buried to protect him. Han had never told him, never explained. Carried the pain in silence, as if discipline alone could hold it back. It changed something inside Akio. The anger he'd tried to bury began to boil. For the first time, his training wasn't just about honor. It was personal. And in the middle of that storm, a new presence arrived. One Tuesday morning, while Akio practiced with a short sword in the inner garden, a young woman appeared at the temple gate. Pale skin, sharp gaze, simple traveler's clothes. Her name was Sakura, and she carried a letter sealed by Han himself. He had sent for her years ago, in secret, to study under another master in Japan. She was the daughter of one of Han's old disciples, and she had trained for 8 years, hidden from everyone's eyes. Sakura wasn't delicate, she was direct, and to Akio's surprise, just as skilled as he was. They fought on the very first day, a silent way of testing each other. The duel had no winner. She knew Shinyu Quan too, but with a feminine adaptation, more fluid, more internal. Akio fought with heavier force, molded by grief. Afterward, she said only, "You know how to fight. You just don't know why." The words stuck with him. Over the next weeks, they trained together. At night, they shared simple meals, and Sakura began telling her story. Her father's dojo in Japan had been destroyed by businessmen tied to illegal fight circuits. The same names, now backing Kieran. Coincidence? No. A direct line. What looked like a personal grudge between Han and Kieran was in fact part of a worldwide underground network feeding on forgotten masters and ancient styles. Victor, little by little, opened up his files. Videos, roots of dirty money. Kieran wasn't just a fighter, he was the face of an organization profiting from the downfall of old traditions, turning sacred arts into business. They wanted the temple, wanted to turn it into a theme park, sell Han's name on t-shirts, every fight televised, every move bet on, corrupted. The worst, however, was what came next. Victor brought a flash drive. On it, the announcement of a new tournament, secret, real, brutal, and on the main roster, one name stood out, Akio Han. Han watched the video in silence. When it ended, he simply said, "Now you understand why I hid all these years." The rain started light, almost invisible. At the temple, the only glow came from lanterns swaying on the veranda. Akio was finishing another training session, this time side by side with Sakura. She mirrored his movements in silence, matching him with surgical precision. The two had grown closer, bound by discipline, by pain, by the same sense of mission. When they finally stopped, she looked at him with a grave expression, as if she could already feel something shifting. And she was right. That night, while everyone slept, a shadow moved through the forest. Silent, carrying a carefully wrapped package. The messenger didn't say a word. He simply left it at the temple gate, fixed in place with a dagger driven into the old wood. At dawn, Akio was the first to see it, a small metal box, light, sealed with black wax. When he cracked it open, his blood ran cold. It was Han, tied to a chair, wrists bound behind his back, face beaten, nose bleeding, but his eyes still carried defiance. On the back of the photo, one single line scrawled in shaky ink, "If you want him alive, come to the valley. Bring your courage." The valley was infamous. An abandoned stretch south of the village, lined with rusted factories and forgotten ruins from the industrial era. No rules there, no police. The perfect stage for Kieran's games. Akio clutched the photo until it cut into his fingers. He looked at Sakura. She didn't need to say anything. Neither of them did. It wasn't a choice. It was a summons. Victor tried to stop him. "You're not ready for what they'll throw at you." But Akio didn't listen. For the first time, he didn't ask for advice. He put on the black uniform once worn by his grandfather in formal ceremonies, tied the sash tight around his waist, and descended the mountain. Sakura went with him, not out of insistence, but decision. She knew what lay ahead would demand more than strength. It would demand loyalty. The valley looked like a nightmare, rusted warehouses, broken scaffolding, steel beams shrieking in the wind. At the center stood a crude octagon, flooded with harsh lights and ringed by a select audience, businessmen in suits, online gambling sharks, influencers eager for blood. It wasn't just an arena, it was an altar. High above, chained like a war trophy, was Han. Then Kieran appeared, his clothes plain, his presence anything but. He walked as if the ground belonged to him, and in a way, it did. That arena was his declaration, the death of an era, the death of everything Han had tried to protect. His lips twisted into a mocking grin when he saw Akio. Grabbing a mic, he raised his voice to the crowd. "Tonight, the new world crushes the old. Before you stands the grandson of the last master, the symbol of tradition's end." The audience roared, but Akio heard none of it. His eyes never left Han. Even broken, Han kept his chin high. That alone was enough to ignite him. The fight was announced. From the far side of the cage stepped Akio's opponent. A monster, 6'8". Triple Akio's weight, a pro fighter, ex-soldier, champion of Eastern European underground circuits. They called him the Wall. He wasn't trained to win. He was trained to destroy. Akio knew brute force wouldn't save him. He'd have to use every lesson he'd ever learned and more. At first, he got wrecked. Heavy kicks to his legs, fists pounding his ribs. He was thrown against the cage, dropped to his knees. The crowd laughed. But outside, Sakura's sharp eyes stayed locked on him. She knew this rhythm. He always hit rock bottom before the turn. Akio stood again, drew a deep breath, remembered the final move, one Han had never fully taught him, the silent heart. It wasn't about strength, it was about precision, a strike to the exact point where balance collapses. He waited, watched for the opening, one mistake, 1 second of weakness. Then he struck, a clean palm to the center of the chest. The giant's breath stopped cold. He toppled like a tree. Out. The arena fell silent. Akio's eyes shot upward toward Han, but before he could move, a gunshot split the air. Chaos. People ducked. Akio searched wildly. Han? No, Sakura. She had been hit. Time froze. Akio sprinted, catching her in his arms. Her blood soaked through his hands. But she smiled, whispering through broken breaths. Now you see why we fight. Then she collapsed. This wasn't just a fight. It was war. The makeshift ambulance rattled down the cracked industrial road. Every bump jostled Sakura's fragile body. Her breathing was ragged, shallow. Akio gripped her hand tight, as if he could hold her here by force alone. Her face pale, her body limp, yet her eyes fought to stay open. Each blink looked like goodbye. Han sat silently by the window, his face stiff, but his clenched jaw and wet eyes betrayed the storm inside. He had never said it, but Sakura was a bridge to a past he thought forever burned. At the village hospital, chaos exploded. Reporters already clogged the entrance. Crowds had gathered after the fight went viral in real time. The clip of Akio toppling the wall, Han being freed, and the gunshot had swept the internet, a living legend of the East. But for Akio, there was no legend. Only a hospital bed, a bleeding body, and a crushing uncertainty. Sakura went straight into surgery. The bullet had pierced her lung, grazed her subclavian artery. The surgeon, a veteran, offered only, "We'll do our best." Akio sat for hours on the cold corridor floor. No food, no sleep. His uniform still caked in sweat and dust. Outside, the world spun. News feeds, bets, endless speculation. But it all felt like a cruel joke. He didn't want headlines. He wanted justice. When Victor arrived late that afternoon, Akio was standing by the window, back turned. Without looking, he asked, "Who pulled the trigger?" Victor didn't answer right away. He set an envelope on the table. "We don't know the name, but we know the face." Akio opened it. Drone footage from the live broadcast. The shooter, partially visible, mask slipped. A badge glinted at his chest. Not police. Private. Jade Wolf Securities. Victor's voice was low but steady. They're behind the money, behind Kieran, and now they tried to silence Sakura, not for the fight but for what she knows. Han's silence was telling. He had suspected as much. Jade Wolf was no ordinary company. It was a militarized machine that bought up dojos, turned masters into security consultants, twisted traditions into profit. Sakura came from a line that had refused them. That refusal had made her a target. She survived the surgery, but doctors kept her in a coma. 7 days, they said, would decide everything. Akio never left her side. Sometimes he spoke softly, retelling temple stories, training memories, hoping his voice could anchor her to this world. But each passing day stoked the fire inside him. This wasn't just about his grandfather or his father. It was about her, about the life they'd never had the chance to choose. On the 5th day, Akio went to the temple courtyard. His fists raw, eyes burning. He faced Han directly. "I want to learn the silent heart, all of it, no secrets, no steps." Han stared long and hard. His beard was whiter, his eyes sunken, but the fire was still there. "You think you can master what only shows itself in that one final moment? Do you think I have a choice?" Silence. Then the old man turned, disappeared into the library, and returned with an ancient scroll, bound and sealed. He placed it in Akio's hands, the same way he had once given him his first lesson, calm, stern. This is the last movement, but you'll only understand it if you're willing to lose more than you already have. As Akio trained until his fingers bled, the news spread. A new underground tournament, broadcast worldwide, marketed as the final clash of tradition and modernity. On one side, Jade Wolf's new champion. On the other, the man who had embarrassed them in front of millions. Akio didn't flinch. "I accept." The temple felt quieter than ever. The rustle of leaves in the wind was the only soundtrack as Akio knelt before the central altar, the scroll still sealed in his hands. Han had made it clear. This wasn't a manual. It was a revelation, something only understood at the edge of mental, physical, and spiritual exhaustion. Akio knew he wasn't ready, but he also knew he was out of time. Outside, the world demanded his answer. Inside, he needed his own. When he broke the seal, a chill ran down his spine. The scroll was ancient, written in dark ink, almost black. No illustrations, just words. Elegant, precise calligraphy. The description of the silent heart movement took only one page. Yet it carried more weight than any sequence he had ever practiced. It wasn't a strike, it was a choice. The text read, "To silence the world around you, first silence the war within you." In the days that followed, Akio locked himself inside a small sanctuary behind the temple, a place once used by his father for final training. Surrounded by candles and absolute stillness, he repeated the same sequence for hours. Minimal steps, long breaths, total control of weight and intention. Like trying to hear a heartbeat beneath a river. No force, just precision, just presence. But it wasn't just training. Memories haunted him. Sakura's pale face on the hospital bed. Han tied high above the steel tower. Victor's words about his father. Anger boiled with every movement and broke him. He stumbled, fell, coughed blood, cried in frustration, but rose again. Always. Until one evening, with his body raw and his fingers split, something shifted. He wasn't fighting against anything anymore, not even fighting for someone. He simply was. The next morning, Han found him in the courtyard, watched from afar as Akio repeated the sequence, unaware of his grandfather's eyes. It was like seeing a younger reflection of himself. The training staff moved as light as air. His feet barely touched the ground. His breath was silent. At the end, Akio opened his eyes to see Han on the veranda. No words, only a bow, small, but filled with respect. Something Han had never done before. Meanwhile, Victor received darker news. Jade Wolf wasn't just planning a tournament. They were preparing a global broadcast. Billionaire sponsors, security firms, power players were funding it as a cultural experiment. Their goal was simple: turn tradition into spectacle, mock what they couldn't buy. And Akio was the symbol they planned to break, live. Sakura had not woken yet, but doctors said her body was stable. Akio visited every night, sat by her side and whispered what he was learning, not because he believed she heard, but to keep alive what connected them. One night, he held her hand and said, "If you wake up, I don't want you to see the world as it is. I want you to see it as it could be." On the eve of the tournament, Han gave Akio a new uniform, black, embroidered in gold with 2 entwined dragons, the mark of Shin Yu Quan, the same uniform his father had worn before his final mission. The fabric felt heavy, not from its weave, but from the history it carried. Akio put it on without ceremony, stood before the temple's old mirror. For the first time, he didn't see Han's grandson or a disciple. He saw himself, a complete warrior. Before leaving, Han gathered the 3 of them, Akio, Victor, and himself. Sakura still lay in the hospital, but her spirit was in that circle. Han looked at Akio with unshaken gravity. "You won't win with technique alone. You'll win with clarity." Clarity about what? About who you've become. On the road to the tournament site, Akio felt each heartbeat like a ceremonial drum, tires grinding dirt, every bend pulling him closer to something larger than himself. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was ritual, a test against the machine that sought to consume everything it couldn't control, and he was ready to be the wall that stood in its way. The final tournament's location was secret, but its echo had already gone global. In underground forums, bets flew wild. Akio trended at the top. Some dismissed him as a lucky kid, others called him the last hope of a fading tradition. The world didn't know that behind that name stood centuries of blood, sacrifice, and silence. Jade Wolf knew, and that's why they wanted him crushed before the cameras. Victor revealed the truth: an abandoned military base in the desert, bought by a ghost company tied to Jade Wolf, reinforced walls, drone control, armed guards, contracted doctors, encrypted streams. The audience, elites, billionaires, investors, politicians, people who consumed culture as currency and combat as entertainment. To them, Akio was tonight's sacrifice. At the temple, the last hours were sacred. Han himself brewed the night's tea, a tradition reserved for warriors facing battles where return was uncertain. The aroma of roots, earth, and wood filled the hall. Akio drank in silence. Han only watched. There were no more lessons left. Everything had already been passed down, in hands, in eyes, in posture. Victor closed his own chapters, sent files to an international journalist, proof of Jade Wolf's laundering, bribery, and tournament manipulation. If Akio didn't return, at least his death wouldn't be in vain. Still, in the depths of his chest, Victor feared even truth might not be enough. Then the unexpected. On the morning of departure, Sakura opened her eyes, weak, clouded, but alive. Akio was about to leave with Victor when the call came. He ran to her side. Tears filled his eyes as she tried to smile. "So, it's time?" He nodded. "Will you come back to me?" Akio squeezed her hand. "I'll come back as a different man, one you helped forge." She couldn't follow him, but her gaze carried him forward. The journey to the base took hours. An ordinary vehicle, escorted by Jade Wolf's convoy. No words spoken. When they arrived, the sight was surreal. Steel fences, watchtowers, cameras. A modern Roman Colosseum, dressed as celebration but built for domination. Backstage, Akio was led into a white-lit prep room with mirrors. He put on the ceremonial uniform, breathed deep, felt the weight of history and expectation. There would be no common crowd tonight. Only gods in suits watching gladiators. He wasn't just fighting an opponent, he was fighting a system designed to erase him. Then he heard footsteps. Turned, Han. Dressed simply as always, but standing like a man who had weathered more wars than history could count. "You got here by merit," Han said, "but you'll leave by choice." Akio met his eyes. "My choice is to fight, to the end." Han nodded. "Then go. Don't fight as my grandson, fight as you." When Akio stepped into the arena, the floodlights exploded white. Giant screens cast his image in cinematic angles. A booming voice announced the fighters, but the sound felt distant. Across the floor, a steel door opened. His opponent walked in, towering, cold, engineered, the champion of the new era, trained by Jade Wolf with data from hundreds of fights, juiced with enhancements, AI analysis, biomechanical precision, more machine than man. But Akio didn't flinch. He closed his eyes, breathed, felt the temple floor beneath his feet, and took his stance. The world was watching, but he saw only the moment. The metallic slam of the steel gate closing behind Akio echoed through the arena. No way out, no escape. In front of him, Jade Wolf's champion stood still, a human wall. His eyes, cold, analytical, scanned Akio inch by inch. He wasn't a man. He was something built to win, or rather to destroy. The black uniform clung to his frame like a second skin. His hands didn't shake. His breathing was measured, precise. He was a living weapon, but Akio no longer felt fear. Not anymore. There was no referee. No rounds, no rules. The fight would end only when someone quit or fell. When the signal blared, the champion lunged like lightning. Akio barely slipped aside. The first punch missed his skull by centimeters and shattered the concrete floor beneath. The crowd fell silent. That blow had been real, lethal. The fight had begun. Akio gave ground, studying. The champion's rhythm was predictable, but the execution was merciless. Low kicks came with crushing force, his entire weight behind them. Each time Akio blocked, his bones rattled. The monster wanted a quick knockout, knowing the physical edge was his. Akio instead focused on breath, stance, tiny steps. He couldn't win with power. He had to win with presence. Minutes dragged like hours. Blood dripped from Akio's brow. His left arm burned with delayed pain each time he absorbed a strike, but he endured, waiting for the mistake. And it came. A spinning kick, too ambitious, leaving the giant off balance. Akio struck back, palm to the shoulder, knee to the gut, heels spinning up into the jaw. The giant staggered. For a heartbeat, the machine faltered. The crowd gasped. Not applause. Shock. The invincible had been touched. By a young man carrying a tradition most of them had dismissed as dead. From the shadows, Kieran clenched his jaw, arms crossed. His arrogance cracked, giving way to unease. He knew that look in Akio's eyes. He'd seen it before, in Akio's father. The look of someone fighting with something no technology could measure. The champion roared and came again, wilder this time. Clinches, elbows, brute attempts to crush him. Akio was slammed against the steel walls, yet his eyes never wavered. In the chaos, his body shifted, circles, pivots, redirection. The beginning of the final technique, the silent heart. The energy in the arena shifted. The crowd felt it. Akio's movements blurred, nearly invisible, like he was merging with the air itself. The giant threw a straight punch. Akio turned, slipped, and struck. An open palm to the center of the chest. The monster froze, stunned, as if hit by something beyond flesh and bone. His eyes went wide. He staggered, dropped to his knees, tried to rise, couldn't. Akio didn't finish him. He simply stood there, watching, then stepped back. "You're still breathing," he said quietly. "You still have a choice." Silence fell. The champion stayed on the floor, not out of weakness, but acknowledgement. Surrender. The referee entered uncertain, but Akio was already walking away. The fight was done, not with destruction, but with clarity. Then another sound. A door creaked open. Kieran stepped in. White uniform, no smile. He walked like an insulted king, fury in his steps. "This isn't over," he said. "You beat the symbol, but the system still stands." Akio stopped. "Then come." Kieran didn't hesitate. This fight was different. Kieran was fast, technical, unpredictable. He fought like a man, desperate to erase history with his bare hands. But Akio wasn't the same boy anymore. He fought as someone who carried history in his bones. The clash was brutal. Both bled, both fell, both rose again. The arena shook with their struggle. In the end, Akio unleashed the silent heart again, but this time without touching. He shifted, poised, and Kieran, reacting to the phantom pressure, struck wildly. Off balance, Akio redirected, and Kieran fell, not unconscious, but defeated. You're just like him," Kieran whispered. "No," Akio answered. "I'm me." Akio left the arena, head low, spirit whole. Behind him, the gates slammed shut, a sound like the end of an era. He walked slowly, every step heavy with exhaustion, pain, and something deeper. The weight of choice. The world had been watching. The images already flooded across networks. The young heir of a forgotten temple toppling the machine of modern combat. Not with brute strength, but with technique, presence, and mastery of self. For them, it was legend. For Akio, it was only the beginning of a path not paved with fame. Sakura, was awake. He knew the moment he got into the car beside Victor, heading back. The doctor had called minutes earlier, her eyes open, her gaze calm. She hadn't asked about the fight. Only, is he okay? At the hospital, when Akio walked in, no words passed. She reached out her hand. He gripped it tight. Between them, silence said everything. In the days that followed, the arena was torn down. Authorities raided the base. Victor's leaked files hit international headlines, proof of Jade Wolf's corruption, laundering, and rigged tournaments. Contracts were pulled, sponsors fled, their empire cracked, Kieran vanished, shielded by networks not yet broken. But the foundation had been shaken. The symbol they tried to crush had instead become inspiration, not for being untouchable, but for being human. Resilient, the temple, once echoing with nothing but silence, now welcomed footsteps. Young villagers climbed the stone stairs, some only to look, some to ask, a few to learn. Akio never called himself master. He still trained at dawn, swept the floors like his grandfather, yet something in his movements was different, calmer, centered. It came not from victory, but from recognizing who he had become along the way. Han watched with quiet eyes. Sat in the garden at dusk, sipping tea, reading scrolls, smiling inwardly. He never said, "I'm proud," never offered praise, but in every glance it was clear the mission was fulfilled. What mattered had been preserved. He could rest in peace. Sakura healed slowly. She walked with effort but steady. She laughed at the clumsy attempts of beginners in the courtyard. Akio often sat beside her. Sometimes they trained together, other times they just watched the sky. They didn't need grand plans. The battle had bound them in a space where words were unnecessary. On the last night of summer, Akio climbed alone to the mountain peak behind the temple. He carried the uniform from his final fight, laid it across a stone, and lit a candle. He looked to the horizon, drew a long breath, and whispered, "Father, I understand." The wind stirred, gentle, and for the first time, he allowed himself to smile. Months later, at the temple gate, a young foreigner appeared. Backpack slung over his shoulders, calloused hands, eyes carrying more rage than fear. Akio watched from a distance, sweeping the courtyard with slow, steady motions. The young man approached and said bluntly, "I came to learn. I want to beat someone." Akio paused in silence, then replied, "Then you came to the wrong place. Here, no one learns to win. They learn not to need to." The boy hesitated, but he stayed. And in the mountains, the cycle began again. This wasn't just a story about fighting. It was about legacy, discipline, and choice. Akio didn't win with strikes alone. He won with purpose. If this journey touched you, share it. Someone around you might be fighting in silence, searching for their own silent heart. Comment below, what did you take away from this story? Would you have done the same, or chosen another path? The legend continues. And maybe the next chapter is waiting for you.